Hello and welcome to this online session titled Tyred, the Economy and Ecology of Waste Tyres in Lagos, Nigeria. My name is Gareth Millington from the University of York, and I'm delighted to host this session this evening. We're going to be hearing from a team of experts discussing the issue of tyres and urban sustainability in Lagos, Nigeria. Tyres are a truly global commodity and a symbol of our historic dependency on motor vehicles, but they're also connected to environmental and health risks. In megacities like Lagos, Nigeria, the problem of waste tyres is particularly acute. End-of-life tyres are discarded on the streets, disposed of in waterways, stockpiled or burned, which can pose significant fire hazards and lead to breeding grounds for malarial mosquitoes. However, as our panel experts who all work together on a British Academy /GCRF funded project titled Numa City will show, used tyres are also at the heart of a thriving, mostly informal roadside economy of small garages, workers, and also there's a female-dominated upcycling sector through which tyres are repurposed in many other ways. So this evening we're going to hear from David Garbin from the University of Kent, Akinwale from the University of Lagos, Taibat Lawanson, also from the University of Lagos, Simon Coleman from the University of Toronto, and Itziar Iraola Arregi, who is an independent scholar. But before I hand over to our first two panelists, David and Akeem, I would like to explain how our discussion this evening explores the trajectory of tyres in Lagos, focusing on a common route or journey. Over the past decade, the closure of tyre factories in Nigeria due to governments and infrastructural issues, coupled with the exorbitant prices of imported new tyres, has led to many Lagosians to opt for second-hand foreign tyres, commonly referred to as tukumbu tyres, and this despite them being theoretically illegal. A significant portion of these tyres is smuggled into Nigeria through Benin, while others arrive in containers directly into Lagos. And it's worth noting the involvement of Nigerian Igbo traders who collect tyres in Europe, primarily from Belgium, Holland, or Germany, and ship them through containers. So consequently, European tyres embark on a second life in Africa once they're deemed no longer useful in their original market. So in terms of the trajectory of the tyre, the initial stage of our journey in Nigeria begins with the ubiquitous vulcanizers in Lagos. These are workers who repair tyres on the side of the roads. And on this topic, we're going to listen to David and Akeem in conversation. So I'll hand over to David and Akeem now.
Thank you. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to ask a few questions to Akeem so that we can have a sort of a dialogue. Professor Akeem Akinwale has been the leader of a team of researchers in Lagos investigating the informal trade of vulcanizers who are tyre repairers, mostly working on the side of the road, on the side of the street in megacity Lagos. So, Akeem, can you hear me? Well, if not, Gareth, you can ask me the questions and I will try as best as I can to answer them.
Okay, yeah, let's try that. So I'll ask David some questions about vulcanizers. I know, David, you've done a lot of work with the vulcanizers in Lagos as well. So hopefully you'll be able to answer these questions. I mean, first of all, David, in simple terms, what is a vulcanizer? What function do they fulfill? And like, where would we see them in the city of Lagos?
So basically, a vulcanizer is a person belonging to a trade that is quite ubiquitous in Lagos and actually in many other cities in Nigeria. And also in other cities in Africa, actually. It is basically someone who repairs tires on the side of the road, on the side of the street. Most of their work deals with patching tires and inflating them. And they are extremely numerous in Lagos. There are, several thousands of them. Basically, they are present in most intersections and crossroads. And they fulfill a very important function in a city that is so dependent on motorized transportation. Akeem, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
So I answered the first question. So maybe you want to.
I'll hand over to you, David, and you can ask Akeem the second question.
Okay. So I was basically introducing the vulcanizer trade, just describing in simple terms what are vulcanizers and what do they do in Lagos. So now, can you tell us about their presence in Lagos and how their presence and what their presence can tell us about the city? Why is it that we have so many vulcanizers in Lagos, thousands of them?
Okay, the vulcanizers are artisans, and in Nigeria, there are different specialists who work on vehicles. Vulcanizers specifically are repairers of tires. They gauge tires, they fix deflated tires. Basically, they repair tires. And Lagos is a mega city. Lagos is the most urbanized city in Nigeria. And in terms of the number of vehicles, Lagos has the highest number of vehicles in Nigeria. By statistics, more than 5 million cars are in Lagos, and more than 200,000 commercial buses are in Lagos. And vulcanizers are specialists. They repair tires. So vulcanizers are everywhere. Vulcanizer stay between. If you come to Lagos, you are likely to see vulcanizer on the highways. You are likely to see them on the roadside. You are likely to see them at filling stations. You will see that. You will see them at motor parks. And the distance between one vulcanizer to another is average of 2 kilometers. So, because there is a high number of vehicles, and most vehicles in Lagos depend on used tires. So these tires require gauging frequently, and that's the work of vulcanizers. They check the pressure on the tires. They put the pressure in the right standard, because it's important for the tires not to be overgauge or undergauge. So, and the vulcanizers are specialists. They have a lot of knowledge about tires, the tire pressure, and so on. I know Lagos is full of a lot of activities. People go to work early in the morning, they return from work back home, and there are people in the market. So Lagos is a busy city, and the vulcanizers constitute an important aspect of the busy schedule of city life in Lagos.
Okay, thank you. The third question is about the research that you conducted in Lagos. And often we hear the vulcanizers talk about their own role. They have an understanding of their role as being doctors of tires, for example. They talk a lot about that. We are the doctors of tires. Or they often also say, no tires, no movement. Please explain what does that mean, and how do they understand their role and their place in the city?
Yes, it's about the importance of transportation, and the vulcanizers see themselves at the center of movements. And even a brand new car cannot move without tire on it. And the vulcanizers are specialists of tires. So they are so proud of their work, because they know the importance of tire on vehicles. So for that reason, they describe themselves as doctors of tires, because if tires require attention, it is this vulcanizer that attend to tires. Like I said earlier, they gauge tire. If tire is deflated, they can put pressure on it to put the tire back on the wheel so that the vehicles can move. So, and they attend to both government officials. They also attend to people in the informal economy. So they cut across. Their role is quite ubiquitous. They provide services for government staff, civil servants, and ordinary citizens. Both people in the private and public spheres patronize vulcanizers.
Okay, thank you. My next question, thank you. My next question is about the informality of this profession. We hear a lot about how the urban economies of the global south are informal. This is a very contested notion. This is a very also complex notion, complex situation. But to what extent could we say that these vulcanizers belong to the so-called informal sector?
To a very large extent, they belong to the informal sector because an average vulcanizer, each vulcanizer is self-employed to start with. But despite this informality, the vulcanizers themselves are highly formalized. So what is going on is a form of formality within informality, because they organize themselves into zones, they organize themselves into forums, they have a chairperson, they have a secretary, they have executive officers within the rank and file and within the leadership of the vulcanizers. So they are well organized, despite the fact that they are treated as informal workers, but within themselves, they organize the trade, they regulate the behavior of members, they carry out meetings twice in a month. Sometimes they hold series of meetings. At zonal level, they hold meeting. At state level, they hold meeting. They also have forum meetings. So all kinds of meetings go on from time to time. But basically, they are informal workers.
Could you briefly tell us about their political role? Do they have any political role through this formalization?
Yes, because they are organized within the informal economy, they have close interaction with the political actors, and the leadership of organizer is quite influential. So for that reason, the political elites usually patronize the leadership of the organizers in order to get votes during election, and in order to get support from organizers in the area of environmental protection. The political elites may need organizers to comply to environmental policy, for instance, like environmental sanitation. So if the political actors do not speak with the leadership of the organizers, it becomes difficult for ordinary organizers to comply. But because the leaders of the organizers are always in contact with political actors, so they are politically influential, really, because they interact regularly with politicians, and politicians also are able to get support of organizers in the area of environmental sanitation, for instance, and during election. So leadership of the organizer is able to mobilize members in order to vote for a particular candidate during electioneering campaign.
Thank you very much. Just a last question. We haven't really spoken about this, but in terms of their livelihoods, can you tell us a bit more about their livelihoods? Are we talking here about poor workers? Do they have enough to live? How economically speaking, how do they?
Okay, I think on the average, more than 80% of the vulcanizers work on the side of the road, and that's a kind of life of struggle. So they make sales daily, but we can say they are struggling to make ends meet. The money they make can be classified as low level of they are low socioeconomic group basically, because they make money daily, but the amount of money they make is barely enough for their subsistence. And life on the roadside is not that convenient, but they are used to that life. There is dust, problem of pollution. They don't have enough space to walk, and they also rely on relatively outdated tools. And many of them are requesting for support to get modern vulcanizer equipment, which they believe can enhance their work and can also protect them from occupational hazard, because their work is quite dangerous. Their work, explosion of tire is a problem, so they can sustain injury in the course of work. And the kind of health insurance they use is personal. They do not benefit from government insurance. So all of these taken together mean that the vulcanizers are relatively poor, but they are still struggling to improve their life, basically. Only a few of them work in a controlled and secure environment like petrol station. Less than 10% of vulcanizers work in petrol stations. Petrol station is a bit secured, and it's an enclosed environment. So it's better for vulcanizers to work in the petrol stations, but unfortunately, more than 80% are always on the roadside, and another less than 10% is working at motor parks and garage.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you, Professor Akeem.
Thank you, David and Akeem, for taking us through that first stage in the trajectory of the tire, when the vulcanizers work to keep the tires kind of usable on the road still. But as tires progress to the second stage, when they do eventually become waste, they can find a second life. And this is in terms of how they are repurposed as informal street furniture. Now, for this part of the trajectory, I'm going to ask some questions of Taibat Lawanson from the University of Lagos. So, Taibat, if you would like to...
Hello, Gareth.
I've got some questions for Taibat then about this kind of second stage when the tires become street furniture. So the first question I have for you, Taibat, and I know you spent a lot of time researching this as part of the New City project, is what kinds of uses do used tires have in the streetscapes of Lagos?
So what we see is that tires are used for along the roadsides as street markers. They're used within compounds as flower pots. They're used in commercial areas as informal tables, particularly in areas where street trading is prohibited. They're also being repurposed and used as furniture, as or upcycled, I will say, as furniture, as game equipment, as used in the fishing business. Practically every facet of urban life, you'll find tires having one use or another. We see that there's a lot of value because of their resilient nature and the fact that they're essentially, the life of a tire never dies. It just gets to other uses. So in practically every part of Lagos life, you will find tires being used.
Thanks. You said something about games equipment. What kind of examples?
So in the gym,
for games equipment.
So for example, in the gym, especially in the outdoor gyms, you find usually the truck tires being used for weight equipment. You find them also being used as in the swings. And you also find them being used as space demarcators in some of the outdoor gyms. So they are also used sometimes as goalposts, especially for street football and things like that.
Oh, thanks. That's interesting. So do people ever question their purpose or their presence in the street? Do some people sort of campaign for them to be removed by authorities? They see them as kind of littering the street in some way?
Yes, I think we have a love-hate relationship with tires in Lagos. Apart from the value that they bring to people, they also are a form of waste. And we find that when the tire stays and it rains, then it gathers stagnant water, and that can be a source of malaria. So especially in the residential areas, they are not really frowned upon. But we also see that in recent times, there has been a push by the waste management agencies to mop up tires on the streets. So we have trucks that go around communities picking up these tires from time to time for other uses. We understand that in some of the industrial areas, they are used, to power the kilns, they're used to fire some of the industrial uses. But within the communities, the main disadvantage that the tires have is that they store water, and the water can then become a health hazard. Some people also use them to keep waste, and that can also be potentially problematic.
Mm-hmm. So you say that sometimes there's trucks that come and collect the tires from the street. Are there ever kind of like disputes over that? Like in terms of some people say, well, these are my tires. They please don't take them. I'm using them for something.
Yeah, so we understand that sometimes the truck drivers can be overzealous and tend to collect tires from vulcanizers' workshops. So there have been some tensions around that. But to the best of my understanding, those kinds of tensions are usually resolved. And so we find that some vulcanizers now have to padlock chain their tires to their stores and all of that so that they don't get carted off unceremoniously.
Mm. So when they get taken away and when the tires get taken away in the trucks, what have you learned about where those kind of people take the tires? Do they sell them on again, or is there yet another use for the tires when they've been removed from the streets?
What we see is that they're going to different places. Some of them are going into the loading stations, and some of them actually headed outside Lagos. Those that are headed outside Lagos tend to move towards the Ikorodu area, which is the industrial axis of Lagos. And we understand that a lot of the tires that are headed in that direction are used in this industrial zone to power some of the machinery. We also see some going outside Lagos towards the Ibadan axis, where we see that there are some factories that are converting them to things like tiles, to other uses. And we also see that a lot of these tires continue to move, and some of them are used to power the cement factories and things like that. But we don't have cogent evidence to what use they get up to when they leave Lagos. But we know definitely their interests in these tires outside the scope of where they're picked from.
Thanks. Now, I know that you've used some pretty interesting methods to study the presence of tires on the streetscapes of Lagos. Can you say a bit more about those methods?
So we used layered methods. We did street surveys to identify where tires were, using EpiCollect, and we carried this out to understand the seasonal variation. We carried out 2 sets of surveys in the dry season and in the wet season to understand the variations of seasonal variations of the presence of tires. We also carried out interviews with community members and users of the tires, as well as some of the institutional actors in the tire environment, like members, the members of the waste agency, some of the upcyclers, some of the recyclers, community recycling people, and some of the institutional agencies. So it's been a broad spectrum of engagements that we've had with people across the value chain of tires in Lagos.
So when you've used the EpiCollect method, when you kind of map where tires are, I know you've kind of been back to some of the same sites where you originally did the mapping. What do you find? Do many of the tires stay in place, or are tires kind of moving all the time?
So tires keep moving. We find that the ones that stay in place are the ones that usually are used for aesthetic reasons, whether it's flower pots, whether it's wall decorations, or the ones on the streets that are used as space savers or to protect machinery and things like that tend to get moved quite often. And we just see that, just like I said earlier, that the life of a tire never dies. But what we see is that tires are ubiquitous on Lagos streets and they are embedded into the daily life of Lagos people.
Thank you. So you've mentioned a little bit about the kind of health and safety kind of hazards with used tires on the street. Can you say just a little bit more of that? A little bit more about that, please.
Yes. So we see that, when tires are not well handled, they can become potentially hazardous. The burning of tires, for example, increases air quality problems across the city. Tires, when allowed to gather water and waste, tend to become a health hazard, in the community and things like that. We also find, unfortunately, that in some communities, tires are also used for jungle justice. So that is also, a risk that, or a negative use of tires in the city. So this whole mix just points to the fact that tires need to be handled better and more responsibly. But what we find, on the other hand, is that there's a lot of interest in tires now. There's a lot of value in the waste sector through the circular economy. And so you don't see so many tires lying around. And we are seeing more of upcycling. We're seeing more of, repurposing of these tires to more productive uses.
That's fascinating, Taibat. Thank you very much. So the third and final stage of our tires journey entails reuse and repurposing, highlighting the potential for creative adaptation and finding new functions beyond their original purpose. And on this particular stage of the journey, the trajectory, we're going to listen to Simon and Itziar in conversation. So I will hand over to Simon and Itziar.
So, thank you very much, Gareth. So one of the nice things about the project, I think, is that it combines the work of social scientists, anthropologists, sociologists, urban planners, and so on, with, I guess, natural scientists, engineers, specialists in engineering and in material science. So I'm going to be asking Dr. Itziar Iraola some questions. You're an expert, obviously, on material sciences, Itziar. And my first question really tries to give some wider context. People talk a lot in Nigeria and elsewhere about the problems and opportunities involved in disposing of or recycling plastics. And this is something we hear, of course, a lot in Britain as well. But people talk less about tires as a waste issue. So from your perspective as a specialist in materials science, what are the technical challenges and opportunities, do you think, in thinking about how we might deal with these end-of-life tires?
Good afternoon, good evening. First of all, I would like to explain what is the main difference between normal plastic, the one that we can see in water bottles, or that is mainly all over the place, or tires. Usually plastics, they can be reshaped. So we kind of melt them and then we can reshape them and they have like a second life. In the case of tires, they go, the first is rubber. So rubber is a soft material, elastic, but in order to get the sturdiness and the properties of tires, we have to go through a vulcanization process. That means that all these chains, chemical chains that are movable at the beginning, they get stuck. They have some new links in between them, so it is very, very hard. And that's why this is the tire we know. The problem is that once this reaction happened, the vulcanization took place, it's not reversible. So it cannot go back to being remelted like other plastic do. So we are talking about a material that either we degrade, it gets destroyed, or it cannot change shape. This is the main difference. So we cannot treat them as a normal plastic waste because it doesn't have the same properties. On the other hand, what we can try to do is to use it, taking advantage of this property it has. These properties are that is very durable, it's non-biodegradable, it doesn't wear with water, with light, with temperature. So maybe using them as a material that will last forever, we could take advantage of this property that for recycling is not so desirable, let's say, but can allow us to use a material forever.
So the fascinating aspect in that sense is that I guess what makes them useful also makes them into a very tough form of waste. And the question is how we actually deal with that. And if we're thinking about this great stockpile of waste that might also be a resource, what actually, can you just give us a sense of what the different components are that actually go into making the tire? And do these components then have different possibilities in terms of sustainable reuse?
Okay, as I told you, it has to go through a vulcanization process. So at the beginning, we have the rubber. It can be either synthetic or natural. Then we have carbon black. That is the element that gives the black color to all tires. Never mind if it is a truck tire, bicycle tire, car tire. Okay, this is like the one that gives the strength, let's say. And then we have a lot of chemicals in between, like vulcanization agents, sulfur, zinc, additives. This is like the chemical part. But in the physical sense, we can also see that on top of the black rubber, we have different layers of metals and textiles. This will give the rigidity, it will help us to properly fix to the wheel, the rim, etc. Then, as I told you, the part that has been vulcanized is the rubber part. And this one is difficult to reuse. However, we can use it as a small crumbs, for example, like small pieces, because this has been used already on the bitumen, on the road, to fill it, for instance. But we cannot kind of go back to the raw materials. We can separate the textile, we can separate the metallic part, but the rubber usually stays as it is. And we can use it in pieces, small ones, or afterwards, there are other systems to recycle, like pyrolysis, in which we try to go back to these raw materials that we used at the beginning.
So actually, one of the fascinating things that you're talking about is how some tires go back into making roads. So they kind of go back into that process. But you also talked about this again, and I think another fascinating point is about this idea of why are all tires black, and this kind of common feature with all of them. But on the other hand, I'm assuming that there are big differences between, say, car tires, truck tires, bicycle tires in terms of their composition and perhaps also the possibilities for reuse. Can you develop that a little bit for us?
Yeah, definitely. The tires, depending on in which vehicle they're going to go, they need different, properties. Of course, a truck tire that is huge needs to stand higher loads than a bicycle tire. So in that sense, we use more metal than textile. On the other hand, on the car, we use the textile because we reduce the weight. With that, of course, the use of petrol, etc. On the other hand, it's not only about the parts that give the rigidity, but also inside the rubber part, the black side of the tire, it's also the difference in elastomer, that is the rubber part, could be synthetic, natural. Usually, the truck tires use more natural rubber. That is more expensive, but has better properties. So, of course, it depends on the application we will use to have one or another composition. When it comes to recycling, as I mentioned before, it's difficult to, we can degrade it, we can cut it, but we cannot reshape it. But when we recycle tires, usually all the fractions have something to do with. And as I mentioned, the truck tires have more metal. So people that are looking for the scrap, the metal part, will be happier to have truck tires, first of all, because they are heavier, because it has more metal. But as I mentioned, one of the, I don't know how to say, methods or technologies to use these waste tires is pyrolysis. And depending on the first composition, the primary composition of the tire, we will get different fractions. And these fractions will have different values depending on that, on the first material.
So can you explain for us a little bit more what this process of pyrolysis actually is? I don't know whether people will have heard the term, but it's obviously key to what we're discussing here. So what is pyrolysis? And I guess a basic question then is, should we see it as a kind of eco-friendly process or more of an environmentally challenging process?
Well, I'm talking about pyrolysis of waste tires, but in our places at home, now we are having more and more ovens from the kitchen, okay, that use pyrolysis. So pyrolysis is only to kind of burn in the absence of oxygen. So it doesn't combust. We don't have a flame, but it's kind of burning. Okay, so I will imagine it as if we had a big net of polymer chains linked in between. That's what, if we would do a zoom, how it would look like. Okay, so the pyrolysis is like having big scissors that will cut these chains in different parts. Therefore, instead of having a huge net, we will start having small parts. These small parts, depending on the size, will give us either gas, solid, or liquid phase. And each of the phases will find a market. The gas can be used as a fuel, of course, for getting energy, the same as the liquid, but the liquid could be used as well to distillate chemicals such as limonene, benzene, that have a lot of market in the chemical industry. And then we have the solid part, the char, that is like the carbon black that I mentioned at the beginning, but full of other stuff that we have added during the processing of the tire. So if we do the pyrolysis in an environmentally sound manner, it means putting filters to clean the gases that we can be removing from the hot, let's say, from the reactor. It's an eco-friendly method because we cannot, we don't pollute anything. The main issue of this technology, they are mainly two. The first one is that it's an expensive methodology because at the beginning, could you hear me? Yes, sorry.
Yes, yes.
It's expensive at the beginning because we need a lot of investment, because we need big reactors, a lot of gas, etc., to prepare it. But once we have the capex, the initial investment done, the second main issue is that it's an energetically demanding activity. So we need to put energy on the system in order to cut, let's say, this net into small pieces.
So yes, it's actually quite a complex process that you're describing there, but clearly a key one.
Definitely.
My final question is actually going to again try and take a broader view, and here I'm mixing, I guess, culture and technology, and asking you, do different countries actually have different attitudes in your experience to deciding when a tire has reached the end of its life? And again, a kind of follow-up question to that is, do end-of-life tires get exported between different countries to be reused? I think that's been mentioned briefly before, but it'd be useful to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay, first, the tires are considered not to reach their end of life when they cannot be further used in vehicles. Usually, we put this limit in the depth of the thread. on the pattern that the tires has. So we say that 1.6 is the well-known limit, let's say. In general, we can find this in the laws of the EU, USA, Kenya, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, etc. But the issue comes that most of the, there are some countries that they have different rules. For instance, South Africa or Namibia, they have a 1 millimeter depth only. So there are some tires that they reach their end of life in Europe or in the US, but they can be useful in other countries. We have to take into account that usually when you change the tires, you change the four at the same time, but the wear of all of them is not the same. So they might be the front ones that are the ones that do the hardest job, that reached already the 1.6, but maybe the ones at the rear could be a few 0.2 more or 2 millimeters. Okay, so these as well are the ones that are sold. It is supposed that these countries that also have the 1.6 limit shouldn't accept these second-hand tires, because of course they already reached the end of their useful life. But many times in countries such as Nigeria, because of the enormous price or high price that people cannot afford of new tires, people tend to buy these second-hand tires. And in here we find a big issue, that is that when they reach the 1.6, they start being dangerous. And taking into account that the quality of the roads is even worse in these poor countries, we find that we are putting a double danger on the road, because the road itself is bad and the tire is not ready for that. And second is that they will have very little life in front of them, ahead of them, until they really reach the limit. Therefore, the waste tire issue that had some countries is transferred into the second countries that receive them.
Thank you so much, Itziar. That was fascinating. We're going to hand back to Gareth now, though. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Simon and Itziar. Okay, so we've had or listened to 3 fascinating discussions relating to the different points in the trajectory of the tire in Lagos, the used tire in Lagos. Now, one of the great things about the Numa City project was we had a professional photographer, Andrew Esibo, who worked with the project and took many images relating to these 3 separate points on the trajectory. So what we're going to do now is going to hand over to David, and David is going to talk us through some of the photographs that Andrew took for the project. I'll hand over to you, David.
Thank you. So yes, thanks for this. I just wanted to show you some of the great photographs that our colleague and friend Andrew Esibo, who has been working with us for this project, has taken, illustrating the sort of 3 stages of the tire journey that Gareth has been talking about at the start of this presentation. Andrew Esibo is an award-winning photographer who's done a lot of work documenting urban life in Lagos. And we've been very lucky to have him. And it has become clear for Andrew that taking pictures of tires in Lagos has also been a way to capture the city, to see through the tires the complexity and the multi-layeredness of a city like Lagos. So we start with the vulcanizers, so the tire repairers working on the side of roads, streets, intersections, and more rarely in garages. So here you have a young apprentice, his master. Close up here on a tire. And now this is very interesting. We had a question in the chat about what do vulcanizers do with the tires? Do they reuse parts of the tires to fix tires? In fact, they do not use tires or waste tires to do anything like that. The only use of tires that we have observed is to actually promote their trade or to signal their presence. So typically they would use old tires on top of a pole or on a wall, or they would pile up tires to signal their presence to the drivers. So here you have a picture illustrating this contrast between the mobility, the movement, the incessant movement of Lagos, and in a way the anchors that these vulcanizers represent in the city, with the tires that they use to signal their presence. And this is a picture, a montage of the tools that are used by vulcanizers. You can see that they usually quite basic tools. They don't work with highly sophisticated equipment. Now we move on to the second theme of the project, which is waste. And here you have the first stage of this process, which is to collect the tires, bring it together, and then cut them in different parts to be processed in various ways after that. So you have a picture taken by Andrew with his drone, and you can see the spectacular, the sheer quantity of tires that can be processed in a very basic way as well. So it's mostly physical hand labor, no use of machines or anything. And those are some of the pictures that Andrew took to capture the reality of the city, using the tire to frame, in a way, urban life. So here you can see some ads about jobs and money lending practices, and also this ubiquitous downfall in the background. And there are thousands of them in Lagos, and it's a cheap way of moving around the city. And here you can see the informal use of tires here to block a manhole in a very dense area of Lagos. I think it's in Victoria Island. And here we also have a sort of informal use of tires in an area where young people play football. Here, tires being used as goalposts on the one of the most important bridges in Lagos. I think is the third mainland bridge. That's another uses of tires. A swing that's in the beach in Lekki, the Lekki area of Lagos, and another use of tires that have been painted and repurposed as seats in this bar, also in the Lekki area of Lagos. So this is just a sample of some of the pictures that Andrew took as part of this project, and we're working on the film as well, and a few publications with this photography. So it's still ongoing. But if you want to contact us, if you want to have more information about the project, you have here our website, and we'd be happy to discuss this. If you have any questions as well, feel free. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but thank you very much. Over to you, Gareth, now.
Thank you, David. And wow, those photographs are really something. We were very lucky to have Andrew Acebo working on the project, and they provide these kind of amazingly vivid illustrations of the trajectory of the tire, but also, as David said, they point to how these used tires are an integral part of the life of the city. So we have a few minutes left. I know I've been monitoring the Q&A as we've gone along, and I know that many very, very interesting questions have been answered as we've gone on. I think there's a couple of, well, there's one open question here that we haven't yet answered, which is from Lydia, and she asks what percentage of a tire can ultimately be disposed of completely safely. I think, Itziar, you might be best placed to answer that question for us.
Yes, okay. If we use them for informal things, like for the furniture, etc., we are using the entire tire, of course. Then, if we use them in, for example, the cement kilns that are in the cement industry, we need to reach very high temperatures because it's very energetically demanding. So we use the entire tire and we burn it. And in this case, we get the energy out of it. Of course, we will use the entire tire. But if we separate them into the fractions that we were talking, the metals from in one side, the textile in another one, and then, for instance, we will perform the pyrolysis, we could find applications to all of the fractions. For instance, the gas, as I mentioned, can be used as a fuel, the same as the liquid. However, the liquid can be used as well to take from them the most interesting chemicals such as benzene, limonene, etc. And the solid that is a bit contaminated, but can be used as well as carbon black, a bit downgraded, but we could use it again. And of course, for example, in the football courts, the turf, I don't know if you've seen, that are very small parts of tire. And of course, this is a big place where we can use a big amount of it, and we can use it as it is without having to put so much energy only in the breaking, in the cutting of it. So we could use everything. The problem is that we produce too many millions every day. So we don't have an industrial solution for such an amount of tires. But for one, it won't be a problem.
Thanks very much, Itziar. We do have one question. We'll try and deal with this quickly. This question comes from Sam, who asks, has the influence of the vulcanizers influencing the development of Lagos in any interesting or unexpected ways? So have the vulcanizers influenced the development of Lagos in any interesting or unexpected ways? Maybe Akeem or David could answer this question for Sam before we finish.
Yes. The presence of this vulcanizer is an important aspect of urbanization, because if you come to Lagos, even if you drive around, you cannot, it's not possible for you to drive around without seeing the presence of these vulcanizers. Some of them put on their uniform, their work uniform. So through that, they are part of the economy of urbanization in Lagos. So their presence is contributing to the uniqueness of urbanization in Lagos, basically. And the association is regulating their behavior. So they are well behaved. They also keep the environment clean. This is part of their modes of operation. They sweep their workshop in the morning. They ensure that they keep the environment clean. And every quarter, they gather together to remove waste tires from their vicinity. So they contribute to environmental protection in Lagos. So they keep the environment clean, and that way they are contributing to the health of the city, basically. So because they have an active association, any member is not allowed to affect the city in a negative way, because the association regulates their behavior. So, and that way, the organizers are responsible and responsive to, the need of the city. So I'll stop now, and maybe Dr. David wants to add.
Yes, just a few,
one or two
just
information.
one quick thing. I think there was they were on the threat, the vulcanizers in Lagos, to be moved from the street side to an area in Lagos, to a vulcanizers village, so to speak.
Yes.
But they, I think they went on strike for a day or so, and this caused a massive problem in Lagos. Basically, people were complaining that they couldn't move because actually a lot of people use tires that have small leakages, so they need to be inflated quite often. And if one day there's no vulcanizers on the street, they really struggle. They can't move around. And this had an impact, and this decision was not taken in the end. And so they have a power really in the city, which is related to the role that they play in keeping it moving.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Akeem, for answering that final
You're
question.
welcome.
I think everything else has been answered now. But look, I hope everybody watching and listening has enjoyed this session. Thank you so much to all my colleagues who have spoken today, and also to you, our audience, for your great questions. It's clear that so many of you were really engaged with these topics. So thanks very much, and good evening.